Thanks, Nick. Tēnā koutou e tēnei ahi ahi, ko you and Rodway Yaho. So I'm going to talk to you now about physiographics of the physiographics of Southland, and particularly in their use to affect positive change in Southland. So I'll cover off a little bit about what the physiographics actually are, and particularly with the context of the Water and Land Plan, and then talk a little bit about whether in fact they did or not affect positive change. So there's probably hundreds of acknowledgements that should be on here. At least all of the ES Science team were involved in this at some point, not to mention all the data team out there collecting data that went into this. But there was a core team instigated and led by Dr. Clint Rissman, and the rest of the people are up there. So a bit of an overview. I'll cover off what the initial reason or driver was for this project, how the physiographics were adapted for use in the proposed Water and Land Plan, what, if any, difference did the physiographics actually make, and then bringing it back to the theme, I'll talk about the role of physiographics in behaviour change. So the initial why were the physiographics undertaken? Probably there's similar reasons to many science questions, is that we looked across the region and we saw a whole lot of variation in water quality that we couldn't quite understand or explain easily. So we undertook work to try and figure that out. And the main thing was that water quality varied a lot across the region, and it didn't seem to be directly correlated or particularly well correlated with land use. So you could have one land use in one area and the identical land use in another with very different water quality outcomes. So just to try and explain some of this variation, this is a map of groundwater nitrate concentrations across Southland. So the red areas are what we sometimes call hotspots, or high nitrogen concentrations, upwards up to 11.3 milligrams per litre, the drinking water standard, or above, and the blue areas are low. So you can see there's sort of this sporadic distribution that's confined a bit to where we've got areas of intensive land use, but as I say, you can't tell from this, but not very well correlated with maybe high loss activities. So to explore that a little bit further, I just put this graph together, not to, don't get too carried away looking at the detail, but on the y-axis we've got estimated N-loss from the overlying land use for areas of land, and this is an average N-loss over 20 years. And on the x-axis we've got interpolated groundwater nitrate concentration from that previous map. So you might expect to see that for an area of land that's had an N-loss average of over 40 for 20 years, you might expect to see that the groundwater nitrogen was really high, but as you can see there's a big spread in areas of land that have high N-loss, and overall the correlation between nitrogen loss and actual nitrogen in groundwater is pretty poor. But of course we wouldn't expect that water quality outcomes will be the same across our region, because our region is incredibly diverse, and there are all these different landscape features and attributes that affect water quality. So for example, here I've got two soils, one on the right there, sort of deep brown, relatively well drained, aerated soil, and in contrast on the left there a glade, poorly drained perhaps, often waterlogged. And it makes sense that these two soils would interact with water in very different ways. And the same goes for the materials that are underneath our soil. So in our aquifers across the region, we've got huge variation. On the left there, so an alluvial gravel, perhaps good hydraulic conductivity, well aerated. Compared to, say, this is the Ojai mine, where we've got maybe older sediments with bits of lignite and coal running through them. So it makes sense that these two very different environments might interact with water in different ways and result in different water quality outcomes. And it's not just what's going on underneath, but the way in which water moves through the landscape. So on the left here you've got some overland flow occurring in northern Southland, probably happening up there today, and maybe contrast some, or another method, some artificial drainage there in the Waituna catchment. So yet again, very different pathways and potentially resulting in different water quality outcomes. So the physiographics were really about understanding all of these landscape features or attributes that influence water quality across the region. So for the water and land plan, we took this understanding and developed a water quality risk framework in the form of this map. So there are 9 separate zones, and each of these zones identify areas that have similar characteristics that determine water quality risk. And I could go on for ages about what each of these zones, how they differ and how they differ in terms of their effects on water quality, but come and talk to me after if you want to hear about that. So this is just another way of looking at it. Say in a catchment sort of scenario, you might have one area of land, perhaps up on a terrace with oxidising soils that are well drained and well aerated, and that perhaps don't do a very good job of getting rid of nitrogen. So waters flowing from there may have high nitrogen concentrations, and that may be the issue, compared to perhaps an area where you've got wetlands and lots of peat, acidic, and soils and aquifer materials that are really good at removing nitrogen, and so maybe nitrogen isn't the issue there, but maybe phosphorus or microbes may be the main risk to water quality in that area. So these physiographic zones were socialised during a pre-notification consultation period. They were generally accepted enough to be incorporated into the plan. This plan, the Water and Land Plan, was aimed at holding the line prior to limit setting in Southland, and was really targeted at getting landowners and land managers up to good management practice. The plan was also brought in some specific rules to target high risk activities that hadn't been covered before. So the physiographics were really designed for this purpose, and also designed as a method to improve plan effectiveness by the way of guiding the most appropriate mitigations or good management practices depending on land type and water quality risk profile. And they also allowed some spatial targeting of policy. So the nitty-gritty of how they were incorporated into the plan in 2 separate ways. Initially, or firstly, as at a policy level, a region-wide policy level. So direction is given for each zone as to what particular contaminants or contaminant pathways should specifically be considered in that zone in terms of assessing and mitigating effects. There is specific direction given for 4 identified high-risk zones to generally not grant resource consents for additional dairy farming of cows or intensive winter grazing where there will be an increase in contaminant loss. The other way in which the physiographics are incorporated into the plan is through farm management plans. So every farm over 20 hectares is required to have a farm management plan, and within that plan there's a requirement to consider the physiographics and specifically what water quality risks are associated and the appropriate GMPs or mitigations. So again, the physiographics were used to help define GMP in a way that's relevant to the particular landscape and water quality risks. So we could have come up with a classification system of 20 or 30 zones that was really good at sussing out the little differences in water quality or water chemistry across the region, but this may not have been appropriate for, or would not have been appropriate for use in the plan, as the suite of GMPs and mitigations available to land managers and users is far less than that. Sorry, I've got the word. Far more limited. So this is just another example of some outputs from that work. So each zone is described in technical information sheets. So this has got descriptions of the water quality risk, the appropriate mitigations and GMPs, and also descriptions of the landscape features that you see in each zone. So did they make a difference? Well, I think the main way in which they made the difference is that they actually changed the conversation. They moved people from denial about having any effect whatsoever to actually a conversation about what was their effect and why was it different from someone else, perhaps. It made people aware of that the same activity can have different consequences or different outcomes in different areas of the landscape. And I think that sort of leads people to automatically think about land use suitability. So if they understand that a dairy farm or a farm in one area has an outcome here and it's different over there, or it's worse over there, then maybe they will think differently about developing that, or that it should be developed in a different area. I think it made people aware that it's more than just soils and lines on a map. That connected people with what's happening in their aquifers and also with their downstream ecosystems, and the other, getting people to take a more systems look at their environment and their farm or their land use within that. So just to finish up, bringing it back to the theme of behavioural change, probably getting a bit cliche in resource management, but it's just one tool in the toolbox. They wouldn't achieve this on their own, but when combined with use in a plan and use in community engagement, they can have a big impact. They were really designed as a tool to help people get to GMP, so designed for that purpose, by improving knowledge of cause, effect and variation. The biggest influence again was changing the conversation from denial to at least having a constructive argument about what people's effect was. And we can't deny that they stimulated community engagement with over 900 submissions on the plan, and about 30% of those were on the Physiographics. So from that it led to development of community groups and a huge engagement from a sector which previously hasn't been significantly engaged. And my last point there is that it's just one step up the staircase to achieving water quality objectives. So again, they're not going to do that on their own, but they've generated a huge amount of engagement, which really helps us along the next steps to limit setting or to achieving the ultimate goal of improving water quality or Southland as a whole. And it makes that far more likely to succeed with everyone involved in the process. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian.